I guess we will start the event right now. So just a reminder that this event will be recorded into a video so people can watch it later. And also, if anyone have questions for James, you can just put it in the chat, and then we will have a little Q&A session at the end of the talk.
Cool.
Yeah. So I'm Yun Yi, and then I'll be your host today. And our guest is James Heller, a startup leader from San Diego. So just a introduction, ACM is the world's largest computing society, and the ACM chapter at UCSD is the largest engineering student organization on campus. ACM Innovate's mission is to inspire innovation and entrepreneurship at every level and to bring together like-minded individuals. So James is highly experienced when it comes to the world of startups, and his passion for business and technology has helped him truly embody the entrepreneurial spirit. He's currently the CEO and co-founder of Wrapify. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we are excited to have you at our speaker event. And to start off the talk, I want to talk about your college experience. Do you come into college with a sort of entrepreneurial mindset, or is that something that you developed throughout your college career?
I'm a college dropout. So I actually dropped out of school. I went to Cal State San Marcos. I was working full time well before that. I really started my career when I was a teenager, but started my entrepreneurial path probably when I was a little kid. So I knew that business was always going to be something that I'd be pretty involved in my adult life, even as a child. So that was always it was already known. I was fascinated by the IT side of things when I was really young. I actually grew up really close to UCSD. I used to do my homework. I did independent studies in 7th and 8th grade, and I used to do my homework in the Geisel library. So very familiar with the campus. The security guards were pretty familiar with me and my whole group of friends because we used to skateboard there a lot and get kicked out of all the different buildings. But it was, the intersection of the internet marketing, that kind of created like this, okay, well, if you want to be able to thrive as an internet marketer, you have to be able to build websites, and to build websites you need to learn basic HTML and CSS, and that kind of created this learning about code and understanding different frameworks and how to work with engineers and how to build products. My early life started as consulting in internet marketing, really focused on MSPs, VARs, and integrators, kind of in this channel ecosystem for technology integrators. And it ended up being a vertical that stood out to me because I understood what it was like to be on that side of the business, and I also understood how to market the services and the products that they sell. Because at the end of the day, I'm a technologist and I'm a marketer. So those are kind of where those two things kind of collided for me. And that led to me being the marketing director for a data center and cloud provider here in San Diego. If you're interested in seeing some really amazing high density cloud computing and co-location facilities, there's a really awesome one in Kearney Mesa called Scale Matrix. So I was part of the founding team there. And then I ended up going to work for Ingram Micro. It's a global Fortune 50. They're headquartered in Irvine now, but largest technology wholesaler in the world. And that's kind of how my career progressed up until I started Wrapify. And Wrapify really started as a need. I wanted to use a service like Wrapify. It didn't exist, and it bugged me enough to where I started, moonlighting and kind of trying to figure out feasibility. And is this is there product market fit? Do people want to advertise on their vehicles? Would brands pay for this? what would make them pay for this? And then you have to think of it through the lens of the different people that that would be actors, if you will, in each respective part of the organization.
Okay, got it. So it's interesting that you mentioned that you have learned how to code in your young age. Like, did you learn that in college, or like did you learn that by yourself, like online classes maybe?
Most of it's self-taught. I mean, I was not a scholastic honor. I went to school because it was a necessity. Both my parents come from from high education. And my mom was a doctor and faculty at Harvard. My dad has a master's in education from BU, and I was the person that barely graduated from high school. So, school was really, for me, like, I hated school. All I could think about when I was at school was how much I didn't want to be there and how bad I'd rather just be out doing what I wanted to do. And so I started in 7th grade, 8th grade, I started doing independent studies through the San Diego charter school system. And I went from basically barely failing, getting D's and F's, to getting straight A's, because I was able to learn the way. And then I later found out that I was actually dyslexic, and I had a learning disability that was never really diagnosed. And that was kind of like oh, okay, well, and I had to teach it took me 18 years to learn how to learn. Basically, I kind of started to learn, okay, well, I'm an auditory learner. If I could listen to the books, I could learn everything. And then that, using like Apple speech, being able to highlight text and having the Mac read it back to me, like, that was like a game changer for me. And having just something native in Mac OS totally changed the way I learn. And Macs have been I'm a product of Apple's infiltration of elementary schools in the 90s. So.
Gotcha. So other than this more like a technical side, like more like engineering classes or programming classes, like have you taken anything that is more about business and like communication, something?
Yeah. I was an MIS major at Cal State San Marcos, but I did take marketing and comms classes. The thing is, though, when I was at Cal State San Marcos, I was already a marketing director. Like, I already had 6 years of experience as a senior marketing leader. So it was kind of like sitting in a classroom and being taught 101, 201, and stuff that just I was just basically doing it for the piece of paper. So the value I got out of higher education was really more the network and many of the folks that I still work with today. So
yeah, gotcha. It's interesting to know about your life before Wrapify. So in case of our audience here, they may not know what Wrapify is and how it works. So could you explain what it is and how it functions?
Yeah, definitely. So Wrapify is a venture-backed startup, and it's an advertising platform here in the US that allows brands to advertise on vehicles nationwide, but more importantly, it gives brands the ability to actually measure advertising on vehicles, all the way through to conversion online, conversion in-app if it's an app-enabled brand like a DoorDash, or like we just did a campaign for a brand called Self Financial that's a financial app, or retail foot traffic. So on the driver side, we're a bolt-on to gig services like rideshare and food and grocery delivery. So if you're an Instacart driver, or a rideshare driver that drives for a platform like Uber, or you drive for DoorDash, or you drive for all the above, and you just want to further monetize your time on the road, Wrapify allows you to do that. We typically pay drivers between $300 and $400 a month. We pay them on a per mile basis. They use the Wrapify app. So if you're an iOS or Android user, download the Wrapify app. That's how you get connected to campaigns. That's how you get on to through the onboarding process and onto a campaign when they become available in your market area. And then on the brand side, we give them really detailed attribution, data analytics, and media measurement for the outdoor advertising that we deploy on these vehicles. So, and that category of advertising is called out of home, or OOH. And so that that's kind of like both sides of it, the marketplace. Drivers that want to make extra money and brands that want to be able to drive very measurable and attributable and addressable out-of-home advertising anywhere in the country. And we raised just north of 10 million to date. We're live nationwide, and we serve some of the largest brands on the planet. Brands like Zoom, Salesforce, Zendesk, Zoho, General Mills, Anheuser-Busch. I mean, you pretty much, you name the brand. Padres here in town, Petco here in town. So we've grown quite a bit. We launched in 2015. We went through Evo Nexus, which is a startup accelerator here in San Diego. We also went through Jason Calacanis' launch incubator up in San Francisco. And we're headquartered in Solana Beach. We've got folks all over the country. We've got folks in New York. We got folks in San Francisco, Texas, Florida. We have folks all over the country.
Nice. It's good to hear. And also, I mean, it's really interesting that and there are like many ways to advertise like in the world like today, but right now it's like advertise on like by wrapping the tags like on a car or something. Like, so could you talk about how did you come up with this idea behind Wrapify? Is there like
Sure.
any inspirations?
Well, yeah, I mean, I am a big motorsport enthusiast and huge car nut. So my passion for motorsports and my passion for marketing kind of were able to merge. The very beginnings of this were, I was like, okay, well, what happens if if race cars get sponsorship from brands all the time, like that's how you fund a racing team. What if I were to do this for my car? And then I was like, wait a minute, what happens if, and then I, as a marketer, I thought, well, that's not scalable. And how am I going to measure it? How am I going to go back to my CFO and like actually report some sort of ROI, metric back to the finance organization? Like, how am I going to actually measure this and make it provable that this brand spend actually moved the needle for the brand? So then that started getting my brain thinking about, okay, well, and this is right at the beginning of the rise of Uber and Lyft and rideshare. And I was like, wow, there's really no de facto ad platform within the gig economy. Like, that just doesn't exist. There's the beginnings of the gig economy, but there's really no advertising in the gig economy. And so, yeah, I spent some time figuring out, like, is there a legal reason why? Is there, why hasn't this existed? Looked at companies that kind of tried doing similar things to Wrapify, but without any of the media measurement. There's a long list of companies in a graveyard that never were able to scale. And then a big part of that was media measurement, automation, and just a lot that goes into scaling this type of ops organization. And eventually I dumped savings, 401k, sold cars, quit my cushy job, and started Wrapify.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So as you mentioned that you have it have cost you a lot to start this company. Did you do this by yourself, or are there any like other co-founders and or like a group of people that they were alongside with you?
Yeah, I actually had co-founders at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And one of the first steps in getting the minimum viable product created, the MVP, was I needed a technical co-founder, because while I can build websites and do that kind of stuff, like building an iOS or an Android app is definitely a whole different ball game. And so I used my network to kind of help find who was at the time my CTO, and he ended up coming from GoPro, and he ended up bringing another colleague with him that was really like the principal engineer for Wrapify in the very early stage. And that really was that was really important. And it was also really difficult, like getting a technical co-founder when you've raised basically no capital and you're a nobody, like it's really, really hard to do that. And that was like one of the biggest uphill struggles at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really helped with that is I built a pretty detailed, I want to say it was like 60 pages, maybe 80-page long business requirements document, like that basically outlined every single functional component of the MVP. I think that was able to help move things along. And I learned that like how to do that process when I was working for Ingram Micro. Anytime I wanted engineers to help me build a product or build anything at Ingram Micro required a BRD. There was a very rigid process for that. And that, I think that was that helped me, because that document that I created kind of helped create more, it made this more serious than just like an idea that some crazy entrepreneur had. It was like, no, this is what I want you to build. Tell me how long it'll take to build it and what you think it'll cost to build it. So I think that was probably one of the biggest transformative things that came out of my tenure at Ingram. And then, I mean, you learn a lot about people when you work with them, and you learn about their motivations and what they want out of working for a company or a startup. And so, yeah, I mean, today, I started the company with there's 4 co-founders, including me. Today, there's 0 co-founders. I'm the only founder. And a lot of that has to do with just vision and the direction that I wanted the company to go. There were some folks that just basically weren't really co-founders, that were given a co-founder title. And then there's some folks that just had a little different, they had a difference of opinion in what they wanted to do and how they wanted to build the company.
Gotcha. So you mentioned that you have created like 60, 80 pages of documents just about the idea of Wrapify. As you were building this startup, like, did you have someone that like to turn to ask questions about, or like any like mentors?
Well, I asked a lot of people about a lot of things. I actually started by talking to a local patent attorney, an IP attorney, just to make sure that like I wasn't doing something that was going to infringe on some patent, or maybe and just do a due diligence on the laws around this type of advertising on vehicles. That was like step 1. It's like, is this legal? It was like the checkbox. Is this legal? Then the second piece was, okay, well, do drivers want to do this? And so we ended up creating a video that was like a commercial for Wrapify to drivers, and it had fake UI for an app that didn't exist yet. It had, it basically walked them through like the process, and all you had to do is go to basically a forum on a website and sign up with your name and your email address, and then you got put on a wait list. And we did that. We spent a pretty de minimis amount of money on Facebook advertising here in San Diego, and we got like 30,000 people to sign up like over the course of a couple months. So it was very obvious, like drivers want to do this. So we checked that box, like, do drivers want to do this? Now the next step was, okay, well, would brands want to buy this? Would brands want to actually spend money on this? And that, by the way, is still the biggest challenge. Selling the product to brands is by far and along much more difficult than giving people free money. So we've proved that, though. We were able to figure out, okay, well, how do we sell this? How do we articulate the value? What measurement needs to be in place? How are they actually able to address the advertising as a measurable medium? And so once we were able to solve those things, we went to market in an MVP state. And one of the first brands to leverage us was Harrah's here in town. It's a Caesar's resort here in town. And then Petco, and then like that created brand, like we had some pretty big brands now, and that kind of created the snowball effect. And then we started getting bigger brands, and then more brands and more brands. And we dealt with every challenge a startup could deal with to this date, including a pandemic. So does that answer your question about the BRD and the document and kind of where we came from?
Yeah. Also, I just want to elaborate on that. Like how were you able to determine the best steps to take in order to create like such a successful startup as Wrapify? Like as you mentioned, you have like been through like 3 steps, like checking the legal, if it's legal to do this, and then check investigated the drivers and brands, and like how do you decide to like work in this way?
Well, there's also another step, and that is, what did other people try to do in the past like this?
Okay.
Because that's another, I think it's a pretty critical step. A lot of people have a great idea and they don't do a lot of research on the idea or things that are kind of related to that idea, because you can learn a lot from other people's mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really important piece. I get a lot of folks coming to me with like ideas, and then I just do like a quick Google search, and then I find like a bunch of examples of how other people are executing on those ideas, and like, did you do this? Like, that is like base layer of before you even get started. So I spent about a year figuring all that stuff out. And when we got into the launch incubator, that came with some capital, it came with a bunch of doors opening in Silicon Valley in terms of other venture capital avenues, and that's what ultimately led me to quitting my day job and going full time at Wrapify in 2015.
Gotcha.
But you asked about, like, did I talk to people? Yeah, I talked to founders, I talked to mentors, I talked to a lot of brand marketers and marketing folks about like how they would evaluate a product like this before I went to market. And then did my own research and did a lot of it, and spent a considerable amount of money on all this. Like, I came out of pocket paying an attorney to do this due diligence. I came out of pocket to pay my engineers in the very beginning, just to help me get the thing started while we were raising capital. I came out of pocket to incorporate the business. So I spent a lot of money at the front end. And that wasn't like, fortunately, I was in a position to be able to do that, but not everybody's able to do that. So it makes it a lot harder.
Gotcha. So a lot of students are curious about how startups raise money. Could you tell us about how you experience with fundraising for Wrapify? I think you mentioned you have sell your cars or saving money for a long time to get enough fund.
Yeah. So, well, first off, I mean, yeah, a lot of it was my own money in the beginning. And then, yeah, getting the first check is the hardest thing, because nobody wants to be first. And actually, after going through all this, it's pretty amazing that like any first time founders raise capital at all. But it has to happen, right? Because if you're not a first time, then we won't have founders and we won't have innovation. So the investors and the seed investors and the angel investors that take the risk of investing in a first time founder, like, they're called angels. They're called angels for a reason. Like, it's after you go through it and learn how much you didn't know, like James Heller today versus James Heller in 2015, like, not even the same human, like not even close. It'd be like the equivalent of are you senior in
Junior.
Junior? It'd be like the equivalent of like comparing your junior year in UCSD. Is it your all MIS folks on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was here through when I was a freshman. So
Okay. Well, still, it'd be like the equivalent of like comparing that to like maybe a 7th grader, like in terms of like business aptitude. Like, we're not even close, but it has to happen. So the first thing we did, that video we created was what allowed people to see the vision. So rather than like pitching it or like showing a pitch deck or like doing a demo, we made a video that walked them through a product as if it was totally real. And that's what we used for driver acquisition. That's what we used when we were initially pitching. We kind of showed them like, here's, check out how the app works. And we had UI that was like totally not real, like nothing was real. It was just a demonstration for how the app should work when it becomes available. And that allowed people to actually see it. they were able to see like, okay, well, I get it now. Like I'm a driver, I download an app, I'm able to look at it, it uses my background driving location to match me with campaigns. Like it all started to become really logical. And so that was something that investors were able to see and go, okay, I could actually see like where this is going. And that allowed us to raise some initial seed capital. And then we went through 2 incubators. And so we got guidance, and actually one of my board members is one of the original founders of Evo Nexus here in San Diego. So he's somebody who literally saw me from like the first time I ever pitched Wrapify to like being on my board, and has been on my board for years. And so, yeah. You asked MIS, what is MIS? I forgot this. There's more CS folks in this, but MIS is Management Information Systems. I forgot that this is more of a CS audience. So my bad there.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. And do you have any fundraising advice for students looking to go down a similar path? Like what actions or factors do you think help you quickly raise money for Wrapify?
Quickly, I could write the book on how not to raise $10 million. I could definitely say that the things that have helped me are you have to just assume that like anybody you talk to is completely visionless and they can't see what you're trying to build, because you're the only, at the end of the day, like you're probably one of the only people that can truly see what it is you're trying to build. And that's why, you know, it's why you're building it, right? If everybody's building the same thing, then you wouldn't have anything that special. I think the other piece of it is creating scarcity is important when you're raising, like making sure that like they understand that the time is now. Otherwise, you know, the valuation of companies can go up because the more traction you have, the more valuable the business is, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the most important thing is actually having traction, like, and establishing what metrics you're able to hang your hat on that traction. So in most cases, traction is associated with revenue or users that are paying or have the ability to pay at some point. And so there's a bunch of different models. Like if you're building a SaaS business, they're tried and true models for building a software as a service business. And there are several great examples of it. I would also advise to try not to take venture capital. Raising capital is not like the best outcome unless you're trying to scale something to, you know, to IPO or to a really, really, really big outcome that's going to be a few years down the road. So you have to also be okay with what journey you're about to go on. Like if you want to build a business that's going to be fun and a lifestyle business, like don't raise venture capital. If you're trying to build a company that it becomes a unicorn and you eventually ring the bell at your IPO, like then you have to raise venture capital. You have to raise venture capital to do that. There's like kind of no other option. So I think, you know, the last thing I would also say is I have several advisors. These are folks that are not on my board that have equity in Wrapify, they're people I could lean on when I have questions. Typically, folks that have had multiple wins under their belt, multiple exits, been founders for decades, are basically people that are better at being a founder than I am because they have more experience doing it and they have more demonstrable success doing it. And I was complaining, this is early on, I was complaining to one of my advisors about a VC that just like couldn't get it. It just didn't get it. I was like kind of venting to him about this VC that just like did not get it. This VC was stupid, you know, like that word came out of my mouth. He goes, "No, James, you're stupid. Like it's your job to make that VC see your vision, and you couldn't do it. You couldn't get him there. And that's actually your fault. VC's not stupid, you're stupid." So, and that like, I'll never forget that conversation because he's totally right. And he's totally right. Like VCs are, for the most part, they're pattern finders. They're looking for things that look like other things that were successful. And you have to be able to like help show them that like the thing that you're building kind of looks like this other thing that had a huge success, that was a fund maker, that made the fund wildly successful. And so it took me a while to like get that. It took me a while like to get out of my own like way in that regard.
Gotcha. So after the fundraising process, the company like grows to a larger size, and you started off as a team of 4. How did you make your initial hires and build out the first parts of the company?
Yeah, a lot of early a lot of new first-time founders make a lot of the mistakes that I made. You got to take hiring really seriously, and with every new hire, you get better at hiring. You get better at hiring because you learn a lot about people. You learn a lot about what motivates people, what is the makeup of the right type of person for your organization. Team fit is actually so much more important than you might think at the very beginning of building a company. But like having folks that you want to work with and folks that want to work on the problem you're trying to solve is more important to me than skill, because you could teach skill. Some of our best employees, some of the best folks that we have are folks that were pretty green before coming to Wrapify, like didn't have tons of experience. Some of the worst employees I've had were folks that had really long, extensive resumes and lots of experience that turned out to not really be great team cultural fit, or just good at their job. So you learn a lot about like people and how to trust your gut, and every single time you hire somebody, hopefully you get better. You learn from your mistakes, you learn from your wins.
Gotcha. So you mentioned team fit. I'm assuming that is some like the culture of the company, right?
Yeah, it's culture, and there's some really easy ways to like kind of help solve for the team fit thing before you hire someone. And I actually learned this. Before I went to Ingram Micro, I was interviewing for a job at Amazon, and I ultimately didn't really want to move to Seattle because that was a requirement. And I went through their interview process, and it was like the most extensive interview process I've ever gone on. It was all day long, grueling, from 8 a.m. probably to like 5 or 6 p.m. Met with tons of different people, and then I learned more about it over time. And I had friends and colleagues at Amazon that kind of gave me the download of like what actually happened behind the scenes. But part of the way they interview, and this is really, really cool, and I took a page out of Amazon's book here. They have people that are not even part of the organization that is hiring part of that interview. They have folks. So for example, like when we're hiring an engineer, I've got folks on my ops team that will sit with that engineer for, and interview them for 30 minutes. I've got folks from our finance team that will sit with them. And we do that. We typically have multiple people from the company, even folks that aren't going to be working with that individual on a day-to-day basis, as part of that interview process. And we gather feedback. We talk about the things we like, the things we don't like. We identify any red flags, and then we kind of move on to the next step. And that has helped a lot when it comes to like filtering out bad candidates. There have been several examples where the person that we're interviewing has a sterling resume, went to a great school, has all the capabilities and everything that you'd ever really want in a resume. And like, we had a guy who asked if he could take his shoes off in the middle of an interview and just sit there. And like, we've had like, and this is somebody who passed the sniff test on the resume and the application. And this is for like a mid-level position. So we've had, we've experienced all that, and we've gotten better and better at it. But yeah, a lot of my earliest hires were some of the worst hires I made.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's funny to hear about taking off the shoes during the middle of the interview. And so as you mentioned, like how you started the company, and I just would like to ask about as you acquire customers and brands and drivers early on? Were there any strategies that were particularly successful?
Well, messaging and tonality in the messaging on the driver front, and like the way we communicate to our drivers, the way we want our drivers to think of Wrapify as a income opportunity versus as a company that they are a customer of, because they're not. Like, our drivers are not customers. We are actually the customer of the driver. And so there's a lot that goes into like making sure that you maintain and manage the tone and the type of language that you use in copy, in written communications, in verbal communications with the gig economy. And then also on the brand side, like it's a very iterative process. There's a lot of breaking shit and fixing shit and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. It's not a like, and there's no like easy, here's the path that you go on. And there are several examples of things that we tried that just didn't work. And we just continue to iterate. We continue to iterate. We continue to learn.
Gotcha. So yeah, definitely lots of obstacles when you are building Wrapify, and also as now. So what are some of the biggest obstacles Wrapify has had to face so far, and how were you able to successfully overcome them?
Well, in 2017, we had this, like, the business was growing, or going into 2017, the business was growing. We ended up raising some venture capital from Avery Dennison. We were like one of the first venture investments they ever made. Avery Dennison's a global material manufacturer, I think like a 6.7, almost $7 billion company. I was the feature honoree for the Forbes 30 under 30 for marketing and advertising. Like, everything was going great, right? So we go and we decide we're going to execute on the sales strategy. And the sales strategy was, Wrapify is an outdoor advertising product. So let's go and hire the best outdoor advertising salespeople, like folks from the sales organizations within some of these age-old media businesses. And we quickly learned that just did not work. And our revenues were declining on a monthly basis almost to zero, when burn was going through the roof. Like, we were burning tons and tons, to the point where it was like, we need to fire everyone. We need to fire everyone on the sales team. Like, it's just not working. And so what we learned, and what was interesting about that process, is like, I never sold media. I never sold advertising before. I was able to sell the first like $3 million worth of this advertising. Why was I able to sell it? And why are these like veterans in the outdoor advertising space just having such a hard time trying to sell it and so we kind of like peeled the onion and looked at, like, okay, well, James is selling it as a solution. He's really good at articulating the value prop of technology, because like that was what he spent his career doing before Wrapify, is like helping distill the messaging for different technology products. Because that's really what this is. We're solving measurement of things that are offline to measuring it online. And so that was like, okay, well, we need solution sellers. And we learned, like, the traditional outdoor advertising world, they weren't solution sellers. They were very reactive to what's called an RFP, a request for proposal, where basically they were picking up the phone and taking orders. They were order takers. Whereas Wrapify, like, we were outbound hunters that had to solution sell to the brands. And so that dynamic was completely different. Like, it was totally different. We had a product that was new and needed a lot of education, and still does need a lot of education, to get brands and agencies to want to buy it. There was also the trust factor. We're this new startup. We're putting ads on everyday commuters and rideshare drivers. Like, how are you able to create some sort of control around that? Like, there's a lot of question marks that had to be solved. And so we started hiring folks that came from media backgrounds that required being like a solution seller or having some sort of digital media background. And that really changed the dynamic. It was very obvious. And so that was a really painful experience, because we went from like the top of the mountain to basically eating crow in a very, very quick, very short period of time. We ended up raising a round after that. That wasn't really the best way to raise capital because we were we were a little bit flat-footed, if you will. And so we went, we basically went back to it, started scaling, started to refine the sales process, started getting going. Things are happening, everything's going the right, and then bam, pandemic happens. The whole out of home, the whole media world basically shuts down in Q2 2020. And then we had to rebound from that. So there's just like all of these real world, these real world tests. That's what they are. They're like stress tests. Can you survive this? Can you survive that? Can you survive this? And some people can't. That's why when you see startups go out of business, is when you see those TechCrunch articles where it's a swan song letter from the CEO or from the founder that they're shutting down their company, which is like a total nightmare. So yeah, I mean, it's going back to being iterative and figuring it out and being a solution, finding solutions.
Gotcha. So there's a question besides your life at Wrapify. I would like to ask you, like, what qualities of yours do you think contribute to becoming a successful innovator?
I think I'm really curious, just generally. Like I'm bothered by things that I don't know how to do or don't know how they work. So if I like look at something that's not even something I care about and I just don't understand how it works, it bothers me to the point of I'll like learn how it works, even though it's not something I care about. And me and my better half have conversations about this all the time because she's the type of person that could totally just like see something, like see a button in a car and just never push the button because she doesn't know what it does. Whereas like I have to push the button, even if it like might do something bad. I don't care. I just want to figure out, I want to know what it is. So that's I think being curious is super important. Having super thick skin, because this is definitely not for the faint of heart. It requires very thick skin, and you're going to get beat up. It's just part of it. And then, yeah, I mean, I think the last piece of it is just persistence. As silly as that sounds, I think that's one of the most important qualities of founders, just being relentlessly persistent. Most startups fail because the founder just doesn't want to do it anymore.
Oh,
yeah. In my opinion, they didn't reach product market fit, but like you don't reach product market fit because you didn't want to keep trying, or you kept trying to do the same thing over and over again and try to get a different result, which is the definition of insanity. So I think that, yeah, it's being resilient and not giving up.
gotcha. So what do you hope to achieve in the future for Wrapify?
We still have a lot of work to do to scale. So yeah, I mean, we just came off of the best quarter in the company's history, and we want to do somewhere between 2 to 3 times what we did this year next year, and that's going to require more folks on the team. So growing the team, it's going to require more investment in our platform, and it's also going to require more people selling it. So a lot of team expansion, but ultimately my vision and my goal for Wrapify has always been to get it to 100 million in revenue, and we're going to do that.
Gotcha. So that were all our questions. So are there any questions for James from the audience? Just a last minute check.
All right, there's a question from Perneet. You mentioned earlier that VCs are essentially pattern finders, but if you're starting a company that doesn't really have any other similar companies that can be compared to, like in a new space or industry, how would you suggest going about convincing the VC of the potential for your company? See, that is a great question. And I still am having a hard time with that. Raising capital for something that's like totally new, that doesn't look like anything else, is tough, because like Wrapify, for example, we started right at the tail end of ad tech losing its like every single like vertical kind of goes through these like bubbles, and they go through these like kind of troughs where there've been a bunch of companies that shuttered or just couldn't, or basically lost investors money. And so ad tech, we started Wrapify like when ad tech had a black eye. Like ad tech was just like, and ad tech was so broad, like you could have been a social media influencer platform, and then that would have been like that would have been put into like social media influencer. And if it was like an ad platform that did like a different version of retargeting, there's like 1,000 companies in that becomes the case. But going back to the, like, you kind of answered your own question. VCs are pattern finders. So what I would recommend you do is look at something that kind of operates like your business, like that concept. It could be in a completely different vertical, and use those types of companies to create a benchmark for how much capital they needed to raise, the size of the industry. But yeah, when it's evergreen and it's like and you're the first in the category, which by the way, like Wrapify was the first scalable and measurable ad platform in the gig economy. We were the first to do that. There are other people that put stickers on cars before Wrapify. We were the first to make it a measurable and scalable ad medium for brands. And that was really hard. We would have VCs, and even to this day, I still have this challenge. We'd have VCs that get hung up on because they themselves wouldn't wrap their car. Therefore, they don't think anybody else would. But like the partner at the VC that's making 350 grand as a 24-year-old, or not even a partner, even associate, guy's making 300,000 plus. He doesn't care about making an extra $300 to $400 a month. So why would he care, right? Whereas like the average American, the income gap is like $400, like between not making rent and being able to like put food on the table. So yeah, like we still have a hard time like we have 420,000 drivers that have downloaded the Wrapify app. And even that like is still sometimes not enough to get the VC to see it. So yeah, I think it all comes down to, can you get them to see the vision? I think pulling from the heartstrings sometimes does help though. If you're able to get them to feel an emotion that your product is solving a problem for, that I think helps quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, I think it's all about pattern recognition. If you can figure out a way of taking the new space that you're creating and correlating it to a industry subset or a product vertical that kind of looks like what you're doing, but in a completely different space, and I think that's probably where I would start.
Okay, that's another question.
Do you recommend people to create a startup initially out of college when they start their careers, or do you think working for other companies first is necessary? I actually think working for other companies is necessary. And I look at it this way: even if you're an entrepreneur today, when you're born, in the future, you're always going to have like a problem working for someone. But there's a huge but. If you go into the workplace and care a lot, and you actually like what you do, like you like the actual work you're doing, that's one piece. Like knowing what you like to do is something that a lot of people never get to. So getting there is important. But treating each workday as a place where you're going to learn about managing people, and even if you're not managing, even if you're just like a very, very, very low level employee, or fresh out of college, you can learn about managing by the way you're managed, and that goes both ways. I've had really amazing managers where I learned a lot about the way they manage people, and I've had really horrible managers and folks that just did not know what they were doing, and I got to learn from I basically got to learn how to not do what they did. And so I think that's important, because yeah, I mean, like even in this interview, I brought up several past employers that taught me about things that I brought with me to my startup. And if you talk to any founder, you probably hear that. I mean, I was just, if you listen to Zeb Evans, he just raised, I think, another 400 million for ClickUp. We have a new unicorn here in town. he was talking about his experience being like a bus driver, tram driver at Disney World. You know, I mean, like, so there's a lot that you learn from. I think there's a lot to be learned from the type of management that you experience as a worker. If you're gonna, and especially if you're planning on running a company one day, like that's super important. So hopefully that answers your question. The short answer is I recommend that you go work for people before you start a company.
Yeah, these are good questions and good answers. And there any okay? So there's no more questions. So with that, we are going to wrap up this talk with James Howley. And I want to thank you, James, for taking the time out of the day to speak with us. And I hope all of you in the audience were able to gain something from the experience and advice that James has shared today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.